Chapter 11, Part 11, The Saddest Day. By the mid-1970s, John Lennon was still one of the most famous people in the world, more so than the other Beatles. Was he happy? No. He was still a young man, only in his mid-30s. Yet he'd spent so much time in the spotlight. He never seemed at ease with himself, even at home. His marriage to Yoko Ono was breaking up. John was afraid it would end in divorce, just as his first marriage had. Eventually, Yoko asked John to move out. He agreed, though he didn't want to. John began to drink too much. He also took drugs. He started hanging out with people who only wanted to go to parties. He got into fights. His music suffered. Yoko reconsidered and asked John to come home. A few months later, Yoko told him she was going to have a baby. On October 9th, 1975, they had a baby boy and named him Sean. When John's first son, Julian, was born in 1963, John had been on tour a lot. This time, he would be a different kind of father. John wanted to stay home with Sean. He would learn how to change diapers. He would be there to see his baby's first steps. From now on, my chief responsibility is my family, he told reporters. For him, that meant quitting music. John didn't record any albums or play a single concert while Sean was a baby. He was there in the morning when Sean woke up. He dressed Sean and played with him all day. Sean even learned to cook. He called his half-sister on the phone to tell her about his first try at baking bread. He did such a bad job that when he tried to cut it, the knife bent. For 5 years, John almost never left his apartment. Music was still on his mind, though. Every once in a while, a new song would pop into his head. Not wanting to forget it, John would sit at his piano and play the song into a small tape recorder. Then he put the tape away for later. Lots of people, including other musicians, urged him to play concerts again or record. Or record. He kept saying no, but then suddenly, unexpectedly, he changed his mind. It wasn't because he needed the money. He was rich. It wasn't for attention. He had plenty of that. The reason John decided to go back was simply because he loved making music. It was part of him that he couldn't ignore anymore. So when Sean was turning 5 and ready to start school, John went back to work. He didn't sign any recording contracts. He didn't hold a big concert. First, he needed to practice. He wrote and played test songs, or demos, by laying a tape recorder on top of his piano. Before long, he had more than enough songs for an album. The next step was to make the album. John started recording and asked Yoko to sing some songs on it too, even though he knew many of his fans would be upset. He called their album Double Fantasy. Some of the songs John recorded, Watching the Wheels and Just Like Starting Over, were about taking a break from music. Others were about his family. He wrote one about Sean, called Beautiful Boy, and one about Yoko called Woman. The album came out on November 15th, 1980, and was a big success. It sold 500,000 copies in 2 weeks. John was excited and looked forward to producing more music. Then, on December 8th, 1980, something happened that nobody alive at the time will ever forget. That afternoon, John and Yoko were walking outside their apartment on Central Park West. A man named Mark David Chapman came up and asked John to autograph his album. John liked doing this for fans, but Mark David Chapman wasn't like other fans. He was mentally ill. He heard voices in his head, voices that told him to hurt John Lennon. That evening, Chapman returned. He waited near the entrance of the Dakota. When John and Yoko arrived home, Chapman called out, "Mr. Lennon!" Then he took out a gun and fired. John Lennon, who hated violence, who didn't believe in the use of guns, fell to the ground. He died shortly after. He was only 40 years old. The world was stunned. New Yorkers came from all over the city to stand outside John's home. Some were in their pajamas, crying. They left flowers. Strangers hugged one another. They sang John's songs. 6 days later, more than 100,000 people gathered in Central Park. There were 10 minutes of silence. Then John sang Imagine. Yeah, look at all this. Played over loudspeakers. The song was his dream of peace. Imagine all the people living life in peace. John's death was a terrible tragedy, but it wasn't the end of what he stood for. He is remembered not only as a Beatle, but for trying to make a better world. In Central Park in New York, there is a mosaic circle with the word Imagine. It is a memorial to John Lennon. In 2010, 30 years after his death, huge crowds came, as they do every year on December 8th, and left flowers for John. Imagine remains a song for peace. That's why Neil Young chose to sing the song on television just days after the 9/11 terrorist attacks. 15 years after John's death, the 3 other Beatles did reunite. Remember those songs John wrote while Sean was a baby? Yoko had the demo tapes. So she let Paul, George, and Ringo record their voices and instruments along with John's. In 1996, the first song, Free as a Bird, went straight to #1 on the charts. Paul, Ringo, and George and Ringo continued their separate careers. There were sad times ahead. Paul's wife Linda died in 1998. Their marriage had been a very happy one. Paul remarried in 2002, but split up 4 years later. Then George announced terrible news. He had cancer. He died in 2001. A year to the day of his death, Paul and Ringo gathered for a tribute concert to him in London's Royal Albert Hall. They played George's songs with other famous musicians, and with George's son Danny, who was 24 at the time. The concert could have been very sad. After all, the musicians had lost one of their oldest, dearest friends, but instead they were cheered by playing George's songs. At the end of the concert, flower petals slowly floated down from above onto the stage. To this day, the Beatles remain the most famous musical group in the world. Their songs have been recorded by everyone from legendary crooner Frank Sinatra to pop musicians such as U2 and Elliott Smith. In 2000, a Beatles Greatest Hits collection called One went straight to the top of the charts, even though none of the songs was new. The Beatles are gone. John is gone. George is gone now too, but not the music. That will live forever. Thank you so much for enjoying this Beatles educational journey with me. And this video is dedicated to my subscriber, Sophie Hansel, who is a big Beatles fan.